Right, just hopped into some 1-2 Blitz. As I always say, these are, doesn't really matter what stakes I play. I think this format, the only like screen name fast forward format I have available to myself, so I think it's pretty good for this type of content. Not going to play any different than I would be if I'm playing, 1K, 2K, 5K, but so it's just, I put it in big blinds anyways, so this board, you can play a small bet, pretty high frequency, or you can play like a larger bet. Your opponent's going to have more 2-pair on this board than they would in other positions, because even ace king isn't a pure 3-bet big blind version of the gun. Some people might pure 3-bet, but in theory it's a mix. On this turn, you're going to want to bet some 2-pair to give yourself some boats on river, but you're probably actually going to prefer betting some of the non-ace x, because you're kind of bluffing, right? So obviously you're not bluffing, but you're trying to give yourself boats on the river, so you want to bet some of these hands. And we have a pretty decent hand class to raise as a bluff. Block king queen, block ace king, like I talked about, which he's going to have. On the right, checks down with a king, we can just block bet. I think we can get him to fold, obviously, a bunch of straights. Flushes, I don't know if he's going to take that size with that many flushes anyways. Might take a 2-size approach, in which case the small size will be straights and some boats. So no, because the boats are going to go for the block 3-bet. Or maybe like a straight flush. It's hard to, we didn't block the straight flush, but at least we blocked the boat. It's weird to snap check back on this board. We have to be a little, I don't really want these cards in my bluffing region, because I don't think he's going to ever check back queens or jacks on this flop. And now, just go for a small bet. Target his give-ups, because I think we can have lots of just like pairs in that line. Very interesting line to snap check that board. Would encourage people not to do a ton of snap checking in spots where it's not a very autopilot, making snap decisions pre-flop in most spots is gonna be fine, because I know I'm opening this hand, right? I don't have to roll for this. I think it's a little close here. 2 overs, I'm gonna float. Not a board he should be doing just a ton of c betting on, but versus small bet in position. We're gonna go for a small bet. We're gonna sometimes stab turn with this combo. But I think I'm gonna check this one. Stab lower ones, and we'll delay bluff some rivers. And I'm just gonna give this up. Gotta be careful, just raising arbitrarily there. This is a pretty good board for our range. You can start double Broadway boards. You can bet pretty high frequency. We have a 9. We have some stuff going on basically. I'm gonna mix in a check here with the king queen. You want to use a hand like this when you're checking, because you can't range bet these boards. This hand's gonna fold, but basically, yeah, the benefit of this hand is we have a blocker to both straight draws, heart and a club, just good things for getting folds and then potentially bluffing on future streets. And then this hand's mainly just going to call versus the larger size. Some of the benefit of checking back this hand over other, Queen X is it's like we don't necessarily have a 3 street value hand. Our opponent can easily have hands like Ace Queen in range. And just like Ace Queen's gonna mainly want to bet because it can go for 3 on more often because it's the nut top pair. Whereas King Queen, doesn't need that much protection because we have the overcard, but it can't always just like bet in these formations. And I think I'm just gonna bet a non-overbet size on this river. I think on the river King of Spades, we're not gonna do much thin value betting. So probably, a king or better, obviously. And even our King X have to be somewhat selective because our opponent can go for like check raise on that river. Or like as in he definitely should go for check raises on that river. So we're gonna wanna be a little selective which King X we value bet. Most of the time when we get to the reverse the big bet though, it's going to be like some Ace King, 2 pairs. Like if you just think of it, we don't really river a ton of bare King X, especially when it's the King of Spades, right? We can't have like King High flush draws because King of Spades is on board on the river. This is probably costing me a little EV, because if these guys have cuspy hands, they're gonna fold, right? They're not gonna wait 70 seconds. What that means is if I do get 3-bet here, I should weight their range slightly stronger. Little metagame stuff, right? So if someone 3-bets me and I ever have like an instance where maybe I want to I'm gonna always 4-bet aces, right? If you get 3-bet, you 4-bet aces at 100 big blinds. But there'll be some considerations in other formations, or in other scenarios like this where maybe I want to 4-bet bluff just a bit less often because of this, right? Like it's a fast fold format and these people had to wait 70 seconds. The big blind, we'll play a standard range because he can't fast fold. But these guys, they're just going to fold a lot. So if I get 3-bet here, it's very likely my opponent has a reasonable hand. Versus the small 3-bet, the overcall, suited ace, reasonable call. Be pretty funny if we get this in now, just because of everything we just said, right? He goes for a large 3-bet, but we're out of position, so we're still going to 4-bet, like reasonably large. And based on everything we just said, we should get this in more often, right? Or at least, face continues more often. Aces with a heart on a bad board for a lot of our 4-bet range. I'm going to definitely check pretty often. And on the left, we're going to start with a call. Probably just check call and call off on any run out. I'm going to check again. And on the left, bet. Cooler is ace. This block is a little weird, just because when I check call turn, I'm gonna look relatively strong here, but and doesn't really change anything. Obviously we lose a pocket tens, but I would expect pocket tens to bet flop pretty often. But yeah, I think unfortunate river for us. I think he probably just wants to bet his hand on the flop pretty often. Benefits obviously from getting folds from us. I know it's a little annoying to get raised, but he's not gonna get raised a ton there. And I don't even believe he had a backdoor flush draw. Again, a pretty large 3-bet MP cutoff. This is gonna be a 4-bet or fold, and we're gonna fold this time. Large bet, so but your pairs on board are still mainly gonna be continues, especially the ones that have backdoors. We have a backdoor flush draw and a not so great backdoor straight draw. When he big bets and the 5 pairs, I'm not gonna do a ton of leading. I just don't have a ton of 5x in range to begin with, and just in general. Once he bets, it's gonna be pretty easy for me to develop bluffs and value raises. This would be obviously a raise. So this river does complete a fair amount, so I don't think I'm gonna go. It's gonna be harder for me to be bluffing a ton here. So I don't think I'm going to go bigger than pot with my betting. Just like, obviously we can have bluffs. It's going to be like queen jack, some floats. We might even need to turn, if we're playing this big of a size, a hand like a 7 into a bluff. Just because he big bet board the flop, we're going to have a bit less bluffing candidates because we don't have as many floats. Check call, turn a boat. And yeah, interesting. I mean, it wasn't an enormous bet, but it was big enough. And obviously, I don't need to do a ton of raising here with my boats for sure. I think I would definitely have some shoves here in this formation with like ace jack. But I think when I have ace 9, I'm just going call. And then this river, he should value bet basically any ace because I don't have a boat very often. Yeah, I mean, this hand, whatever. That hand's going to value bet because it's a good hand. But he could probably just value bet every ace on the river because he's kind of free rolling my ace X on that run out because I don't have ace king or ace queen ever. So I have to have exactly ace 9. So pretty unlucky for him. Obviously, not only did I just turn a better hand, but like I said, he's free rolling every ace. So he can like just jam every ace, and no matter what ace I have, I'm calling for a chop against his ace X at best, and then I lose to ace king and ace queen and ace 9. So pretty terrible spot for me. So just shove every ace and shove some bluffs, and I'm gonna be like in not an amazing spot with a lot of my range. We're gonna go for the cold 4-bet here. I believe this is the opponent we just played that aces versus a 9 hand against. That's pretty funny if we get some action here to have aces against him 2 big pots in a row. He calls. This board is just, he's just gonna miss this board a lot. I think aces with a diamond though, I don't think, I could definitely bet very high frequency here, but we're gonna want some checks here. And again, aces with a diamond makes some sense to use sometimes. Just like low enough board that obviously I'm gonna have a big advantage because my overpairs are very nutted, but I have a lot of air here. And he, when I have king, queen of hearts, and he has like pocket 8s, he has a pretty big equity advantage. And then on turn, I think we'd want to start bluffing, obviously, and fold here versus the big bet on the right. I expect a fair amount of folds here, but so most of his 10x should bet turn. The 10x I want to check turn are actually ace 10 in this spot, because if he has ace 10, he unblocks my bluffs. Like if he has a 10, he's kind of playing for stacks anyway, so his ace 10 want to check, I think. And then it's kind of nice because now we only really lose to quads. But yeah, ace 10 wants to check turn. And then his other 10 want to bet. So it's actually less likely he has 10 when we have 2 aces. Remember I said we have king, queen of hearts and he has 8s? Obviously it worked out. Like the board run was very nice for us. But pretty funny to have the exact hand we thought we could be up against. And we have aces again. Is that guy at this table? He is not. That would be very unfortunate. So high, low, low. Basically, like you always want to think of these boards in like general terms, like not jack 6-5. What do I do? More so like high card, 2 connected low cards. With the big gap between the high and the low cards, you typically are going to prefer smaller bets. And the more you run out, just like a little thing to think about, the more you run out of overpairs on the board, so the higher the top card is, the more you're going to want to bet them, right? So if the board is like 9 high, you're going to check aces and kings more often. The higher the second card or the top card becomes, the more you're going to want to check. And here, so I have tons of potential bluffs, 7-8, just any float here, 7-8, and then 8-9. That's a lot of combos right there. And then my opponent struggles on the king, so I think it's fine to use pot on that river. I don't have much 5x, so probably don't need to go bigger than pot. And also because like some 5x would raise turn. So flop top set. We've been getting pretty fortunate spots, but this board's just gonna be very high frequency bet for us. So we'll start with bet. Gonna isolate the limp from what is most likely a recreational player, and probably just bet half pot, call it off here. Okay, I'm just gonna shove. Triple Broadway turn. You're gonna want to quite often size down when you bet. I'm gonna go for a double barrel here for the small size. He's actually ahead. We're gonna chop pretty often here, but yep. I mean, I lose to king 10, but he can only have suited. It's 4 combos, right? And typically when you have aces here, you want to bet, like, you could play 2 sides here, or you could just go for the protected bet of small. Basically, if I check here, he has to, like, you know, obviously my range can have checks here, but when I'm checking aces, it's because I expect him to turn hands into bluffs, but this hand just mainly wants to bet. He has lots of hands that won't, like, if I check, he's obviously gonna check back a queen or a jack. And I do block, you know, if I could definitely have shoves in that line, and I could have small bets. And then I'm gonna have, like, say I have ace king, I'm gonna want a small bet, so it's nice to protect your small betting range with a hand like aces. Ace 10 off, mainly just going to call blind versus blind. And largest bet, I think this is going to be basically like the weakest hand I would continue versus this size. So if I had ace 8, I would fold. So having said that, it's going to be this hand and flush draws that become the weakest hands on the turn for me. So I'm going to bet. You wouldn't always bet your ace highs on this turn, or you wouldn't bet ace highs that much in this formation. But I think in this spot, it's a reasonable spot because of the fact that he bet a bit bigger on flop. So you know, you always want to think about, like, the smaller your opponent bets, the higher in range ace high will be, right? If your opponent bets 1 big blind on the flop into a pot of 50, then, you know, ace high is pretty high in your range because you have to basically call everything. If your opponent bets pot or bigger and you continue an ace high, then it's probably going to be like the weakest hand you get to the turn with. So you're going to consider bluffing ace high a bit more, the bigger your opponent bet the flop with. Or, sorry, this larger your opponent bet the flop for. Just always something to think about in those spots. We're gonna go for a 3-bet here. I typically go a bit smaller under the gun for MP because ranges are tighter, and you have more action left behind you. So it just means, like, although we're only 3-betting against the under the gun open, we are in some ways 3-betting against the entire table, right? Because everyone is still left to act. So it's like a little thing, right? You're basically, even though I'm only technically 3-betting the first opener, everyone else still has their uncapped ranges. Their uncapped ranges are any 2 cards, so it's mainly just going to be a fold, but you know, they can have good hands. Would be a potential squeeze spot, sometimes for sure. It's going to depend on my, but I need to have some information on the people involved. Again, towards, like, backdoor flush draw, non-nut gutter, I think this is pretty close versus half pot, but because of the backdoor flush draw, I think it's worth considering defending. We've also seen this opponent we're going to want to bet check raise relatively large here when we do check raise. And 2 over, this is actually a reasonable bluffing candidate now. Most of my 10x bet flop, so on this turn, I'm mainly going to use this size. Okay, I mean, he can definitely have queen jack in this line, but that's just going to be a cooler. I'm just going to shove, I think. When I check raise the size I did and get to this river, my bluffs will be hands like jack 9, 9, 7. good river. Yeah, my bluffs will be hands like Jack 9, 9-7. Basically just like straight draws that make a pair on the river, just because on that river I kind of have to pull from paired hands because of the way my check raise range looks on the turn. It's like combo draws. You're gonna want to put in like a few just like random kind of airy ball, not much, but like just a little bit of like trash. But basically the closest stuff I'm gonna have to trash is probably gonna be like some gut shots or like bottom pairs out of frequency. So on that river, you know, I'm gonna have to basically just shove a 9, and it's nice to shove a 9 because like we don't really have showdown with the 9 anyways, and we block his like river improves with a hand like Jack 9. We block like Queen Jack, which he could bet call turn with, and then if he bet calls the turn with a hand like Ace 9, I think versus that size, Ace 9 should mainly fold because it's gonna be one of the weakest hands you could consider value betting, and then when you get raised, you're gonna have pretty terrible removal against my bluffing region. So obviously a very good river, and with that combo, if we had missed, like say the river had been a brick, we're gonna mainly give up. If I river like a 6 or a 7, that hand's gonna be you know, in consideration for bluff jamming. It's kind of interesting, like in that spot, a lot of times you will give up with your air. Like basically your air or your rivered pairs are gonna have like pretty similar showdown value. But at least when you river like a weak pair, you'll have some blocker properties to your opponent's like river improves, even though again, not going to be a huge consideration on those rivers because your opponent shouldn't really bet hands that improve to the pairs you're bluffing. As in like, you know, ace of that, so ace 9, ace 6, those type of hands really shouldn't bet the turn much, but still better bluffing candidates than just complete airballs that only block folds. So my opponent goes for a half pot flop bet. Going to call 8s for sure. Not going to raise this hand, just like doesn't have any properties that would lead me to raising. This hand's going to actually stab flop sometimes. We'll go for it this time. Basically, we have some backdoor equity, some pretty like deceptive backdoor equity. And when my opponent goes half pot check, I think I'm going to have 2 sizes here, block and a large bet. You play block and pot, block and overbet. Either are fine. Like my opponent didn't go so large on the flop that I'm not able to value bet this hand, right? The size he took, he could have a hand like a 7, a 3, and then obviously he has bluff catchers. He has some rivered 5x, whatever the river was. So again, another spot to consider, like what size is my opponent bet on flop? Because the larger he bets, the less you're going to be able to block the river, basically. As you get deeper in this spot, calling becomes a little more attractive. So what that means is you can have a, you know, early position open, small blind. It's not like a super enticing, very large bet. Interesting to play very large on this flop. He's not gonna have much 6x, but neither am I. But typically on the like paired boards, especially like King 6-6, you're going to use a lot of small bets on flop because he either has nuts or air, and I'm playing out of position against a nuts or air range, so like you don't need to bet as big. It just doesn't really accomplish as much. You're trying to force out of position to defend wider. On a board where, you know, even if he bets really small, it's hard for me to defend enough, especially like in practice. Like maybe the solver can do it pretty easily, but in practice humans are going to struggle. Defend 4s and 3-4. This is again a large bet. We have a nut gutter though in position, so I'm gonna call. We're also like deep enough, and the sand plays pretty easy. If my opponent checks, I can just bluff. 4s with a diamond, says we will obviously fold. 4s with a diamond, definitely going to call 1. Now we have 3 to a straight, 3 to a flush. It's not an amazing hand. It's mainly on a call fold, but you know, we turn some good turns. He can bet give up, but this hand will just call 1, fold. If I had 4s without a diamond, I would just fold flop. So. would have potentially opened the queen 5. I mean, pretty low in range open, especially like I'm playing HUDless. This is not a pool that I play much in, aside from making videos, so I'm not gonna have any notes on any of these players. So I'm not gonna be able to make any, like, I'm just gonna try and play reasonable pre-flop. I'm not gonna have any I'm not gonna have much reason to deviate pre-flop unless I've played with one of these guys at like 1K or 2K on ACR. This hand I could have just snap folded. I'm obviously not V-pipping 7-4 off from the small blind, basically, regardless of what happens, but just gonna call the 6 suited. My opponent snap checks. On this turn, we're not gonna do much betting from the big blind. We're gonna, pretty high frequency check twice here with bear ace-x for sure. Our betting range is gonna be like pretty polar, so it's gonna be some of our best ace-x, maybe hand like ace-9, and then on this run out, I think I'm going to play some sort of half pot. I'm not gonna value bet super thin here, so we'll play like half pot and over bet. Because when I check twice, I'm gonna have some very strong hands because I'm gonna like have whiffed the check raise. So I think playing, and I'm not that incentivized to play like a ton of small betting on that river. You can play like, maybe my hand was a little, maybe size will, maybe I want to play like 40 and 150. That could be a reasonable split for that spot. If I knew more, basically like this opponent has to be making some relatively large mistakes for me to want to flat sixes there. This formation is interesting. We're deep with the initial opener, so I think this is a pretty nice squeeze spot. It's difficult for him to 4-bet me too aggressively here. I have a suited ace in position. He's gonna play reasonably well. Like I'll even on board like this. I think I can bet this hand. I don't have any backdoors aside from backdoor straight draw, but I block aces. This guy's got a very wide range. Neither player has a 6 very often, and it's going to be very uncomfortable for my for this player to call with another player left act. I'm betting into 2 people. I have a pretty strong range. I'm going to be selective on the turns I barrel on. When I get 2 calls, even though I turn an ace, this hand is mainly just going to want to check down now. I don't really expect to be beat that often. If this opponent leads, I'll probably just fold, as weird as that sounds, because it's not a turn that he should do a ton of leading on. And if he leads into 2 players, it's going to be, likely he's quite strong, like exploitatively. So I could myself do something a little exploitative here. When this player is most likely a recreational player, so this is the only reason I would consider doing this. But I think I'm still gonna want checks here. Yeah. So I lose to a7 and quad 6s. But yeah, I'm gonna want some, like, I definitely don't want to range bet this turn. But it is a spot that's kind of interesting. Like, I think you can bet this spot pretty often because this guy never has an ace unless he has a7. Neither of them have much 6x, so it's like pocket 7s. Now I'm not worried about pocket 7s, obviously, on this river. So it's like pocket 7s that I'm worried about, and obviously this guy can have a hand like ace king sometimes, but he's gonna be less incentivized to like play this formation passively. Sorry, pre-flop for one, and then like he won't want to float as often. Just gonna go for a half pot bet here. When I'm betting this spot into 2 opponents, it's going to be difficult for me to like use very large bets against 2 ranges, especially on like a double ace-ace run up. So one of those high and 2 middling card textures I think that once you get in these scenarios, you can play bigger bets and checks. So like these cards are connected enough, and like all the cards are high enough that you're gonna have less whenever you're thinking of, you know, small bet versus big bet. So we face a big bet here. We have to be, again, careful here because we have lots of hands to continue here. And although I have I have ace high and a straight draw, I think this hand's actually just going to fold because I'm going to have too many potential calling candidates there. So the 10x I'm going to call. I'd even probably prefer some jack x because at least they make the nut straight on a 10. And there's not a ton of difference between like ace 5 and ace jack, we'll say. Aces again. Maybe I should have played some like higher stakes for this plain explain just because of how often I'm getting aces. Cold 4-bet in these formations. I don't know anything about this opponent. If I shove here, he's supposed to find some folds with some strong hands. So that increases your, like, it's not that I expect my opponent to be bluffing a ton in this formation, right? Like I don't really expect him to have a ton of bluffs here. It's like under the gun button, big blind. But if I shove, he's supposed to 4-bet fold some hands that will put in money post flop. So especially if this guy shoves, I mean, it's more important if he shoves. Like if he shoves, this guy's supposed to fold some ace king offsuit. If you don't think your opponent ever folds that and doesn't have bluffs, then you'd be more incentivized to just like fast play this. I think not super unlikely we lose this spot to kings or tens, but obviously we will not be folding. I mean, especially when he takes this size on turn. I think I'm probably gonna get stacked by kings here, but like this is just not a size that he's allowed to use. If he has kings, I'm probably gonna get stacked anyways. So I'm just gonna raise. It's not like, oh, if he has kings, I'm gonna get stacked anyways, so I'm gonna raise. It's just the size is so small that I'm definitely gonna want raises, and I have an overpair. And I don't have many overpairs on a king high board. So, and I definitely have equity, like, to deny. So I can definitely still have some slow plays there, but aces will not. If I have ace king, I'll probably just call, because then I have, you know, more incentive to keep his range wide, as in I don't beat as much. In this scenario, if I have aces, he can have king queen or ace king. Whereas if I have ace king, then I, you know, block more of his value region, and I don't beat as much of his. Like if I have aces, I block aces, so it's hard for him to have aces. Whereas if I have ace king, I do a worse job at blocking aces, and I block more of his king x. Just fold the king 10 off. I'm gonna start pretty high frequency check. I open MPing it flat by the button. This spot's interesting now. It's just interesting because there's nothing for me to bluff against anymore, because if he has an ace or a queen, he's obviously not folding, and then everything else I beat. So if the turn was different, then this hand would be a bluffing king, because just call with my king high. Because if the turn is different, I guess, yeah, he's value betting. Sorry, if the turn is different, then I have like hands I'm targeting, or even with king high, right? I have equity, and I'm trying to get him to fold like under pairs. Whereas on that turn, I beat all his under pairs. So I'm less incentivized to bluff king high because I'm basically trying to get him to fold king high. Reasonable board for us. If the lower this, so like 765, 764, those are gonna be even better for us. I think this board is more middling, but we can still definitely, like this hand doesn't really care if I have to bet fold. I can use this on a bluff on some runouts, but you can't stab all of this stuff. You're gonna have a lot of, but yeah, the benefit of stabbing this hand is like I really don't care. If I get raised, my hand is not gonna realize equity super well. We're gonna check call with the backdoor flush draw. Board we're gonna check a lot, and check call pretty often. Not going to be doing a ton of check raising these positions on this texture. So going to have overpairs in range. I think this is a fine strategy for my opponent. Not a spot I'd really want to split range, so he could play just this size and that could be fine. If he's playing this in big, I think again, some people can do that, but it makes the strategy quite complicated. But exploitatively, it could be fine versus what a lot of populations do. But I'm pretty comfortable in my range in that formation. I don't need to pull far from, I'm just going to have reasonable continues. If I have some ace highs, I'll have to call versus the small double barrel. And then I'll have like traps and just like ace high flush draws, king high flush draws, and then overpairs on for the check call. This hand just raise fold versus this. And I said like don't snap do things. If you're snap folding, please snap fold. Do not be the person who pretends they have a decision pre-flop, and I mean in Blitz is not as big of a deal. But don't be the guy who's holding up the table just because you want to, sell that you had a tough decision, especially if it's raise face 3-bet, because you're not giving there's a lot of formations you're going to raise fold a lot. It doesn't give away any information about your range. Okay, versus a bigger bet, we obviously will fold this hand. I mean, that hand would fold versus any size, but still good to take a second, look at the size you're facing, and decide how does that affect my continuing range. Calling, raising, folding. So here, like, I don't even know if on ACR, if I click this, if it'll fold if there's no action. There's some fast fold sites where if you click fold, it'll fold out of turn, or like fold before the action. Which you don't want to do because there's a scenario where it like folds to the small blind and they limp. So then you have equity obviously in the pot. So even 3-7 off would rather realize that equity than just fold. Mainly 4-betting this hand in this formation. In other spots, you'll want to flat some ace king. But cut off button, you're basically just want to pure 4-bet this hand. And obviously, always call versus jam. So this board, my opponent's going to have a fair amount of misses on. I'm going to start with a bet with this hand. You can't just... So in 4-bet pots here, you can't just bet your... Obviously, just the thing of this stuff. You can't just bet your pairs and check your air. You also want to make sure ace king is going to make up... Well, that's always good. Ace king is going to make up a reasonable percentage of your 4-bet range, obviously. So if you check every time you have ace king, then your checking range is going to have too much ace king. So, especially if you're not playing 4-bet shoves pre-flop. So then therefore when you get post-flop, you're going to need to make sure you're betting enough ace king on these like just random boards, because it's especially in the spots where you have a reasonable checking frequency. If you're not checking everything, right? There could be spots where you just check your entire range. If you like 4-bet MP versus button and it's like a 3 straight with like all the sets your opponent has and you don't, then you could, so you 4-bet and your opponent calls and the board is like 7, 8, 9. You could simplify to just checking everything. Aside from those spots where you're developing a betting and a checking region, you're going to want to make sure that you bet some of your ace king, even on the boards that feel a little uncomfortable. Because again, if you just say your betting range is your overpairs and some other bluffs, and then you check basically all your ace king, then it's pretty easy for your opponent to play against because you just have like too much ace king in your checking region. I'm going to just check twice with this hand and probably, okay, and we'll just showdown. Good showdown. All right, we'll call it there. I think we had some pretty interesting spots, and we'll be back soon with another Play and Explain. All right, guys, talk to you later.